Hello and welcome to another Digital Photo Mentor live stream. Today we are editing subscriber submitted images. Well, I am. Okay. Do you like a new countdown timer? Rob is in the chat and he has made the new video clip countdown timer, so we can get right into it. If you're new to the channel, what we do is I could accept subscriber submitted images. You can use this link to submit your images and then watch me edit them live, right? So I pick a few images each week to edit, and I talk about my approach, why I'm going to do these things to this image, and then execute that using Lightroom and or Photoshop, Luminar, and Topaz products. So I use whatever is necessary. Those are all tools that I have in my toolbox. Okay. I want to share something else with you today as you are coming in. Just let me switch my picture up here. A lot of times I will demonstrate Luminar Neo as well as part of my workflow process. And Luminar Neo has been available for a little while now for purchase. They released it a while ago, and we also have released our Luminar Neo course. So if that is something that you are using or interested in using, you can watch the videos here on the channel to see if Luminar is something that you would like. And if you want to learn more about Luminar, the course is ready to go. So I'm literally building it as you're watching the lessons. Sheila said that she's already starting the lessons, and you can let us know if you're enjoying them. So she says, great so far. Awesome. So there's several lessons up there already, and you can go through them. Then next week we're starting the live classes. So there'll be components of live Q&A as part of this class. So you'll be able to speak to me and interact with me live, not even like this, like actually in a Zoom. So I can talk to you and you can talk to me. All right. Holly's doing the course as well. She's on lesson 4. Awesome. Right. So with the course, you get my raw files to practice with and a few free bonuses as well. We give you a couple of sky replacements, a couple of texture overlays, and a couple of bokeh overlays to practice with as the lessons go along. So without further ado, I want to hop over to Lightroom and let's get started with today. Okay, last week we did some of Bjorn's images, and I think that I saw he is here as well again, as is Nigel and Holly, Trish, all of our regulars, Marguerite. Hey, Lynn, how are you? How is Vancouver? We got sunny today. It kind of looks like this picture on the screen, actually. So Bjorn in Sweden looks a lot similar to Edmonton. Rita in Manitoba. So we got lots of Canadians represented. We got all the way from Vancouver to Ontario so far. So let's get started on this image of Nigel's. All right. And I know that some of you are also following along with the classes in the Visual Storytelling Conference. I will be actually ending this live at 5 minutes to the hour today because I got to go and hop on one of those Ask Me Anything. So if you are signed up for that, you can come and join that one at the top of this hour. This is Bjorn's image, Rob. And then, of course, we have Nigel in the Bahamas. Okay, so let's get started on this one. So what I want to do with this image is to really bring out the texture of the snow and the detail, right? So as you can see, he's got, let's check our clipping. Okay? The exposure is sort of pushed up to the right, which is fine. Only a little bit of the sky is overexposed, which tells me that this clipping warning, let me turn on my mouse highlighter. So this clipping warning here gets turned on when I press J on my keyboard, or you can use these little triangles here to turn them on and off. So this is the highlight clipping warning, which tells me that this part of the sky will have no detail. Okay, so it has no information in those pixels if I was to print it as is. Okay, so we want to bring out some of that detail. So the first thing I want to do is check the camera profile here as those little 4 squares. So he's used or shot with natural, and let's see what camera he's using. So Olympus, so these are the camera settings and camera profiles for Olympus. Okay, so he's used natural. We could try vivid. Okay, that gives us more blue and so on. I generally like to stick with something a bit more neutral because I'm going to punch up the colors and everything a little bit more myself. So I might even go with muted, but I think we'll stick with the one that he had. It seems to be the best one. Right. The next thing I'm going to do is global adjustments. Okay. So I want to check the amount of whites, and I'm holding down the Alt Option key while I'm clicking on the slider. And that gives you the same clipping as if I had the J key on. Okay. So if I turn the J key on, right, see where the highlight warnings are exactly in the same place. Okay. So I don't want to take my whites to the left because then it's going to affect the entire image. Remember, this is global. To fix this sky problem, I might do a sky fix first. Okay, but I've changed my attack here. I'm going to actually correct this image because the tilt is bugging me. So I'm going to do a crop. See how the horizon is crooked? And I'm just going to click auto and see if that fixes it. Right, so that did a pretty good job and it looks pretty straight. If you just click outside of the box and hold, you'll get these squares, this grid, so you can see a little bit better. Okay, so that looks pretty good there. But I'm actually going to reset it and show you how to do tilt corrections another way. Okay. If you have, let's say, a series of images like this that you shot and you didn't use a tripod, so they're all crooked, right? You could use the transform section, okay, and set it to level and see how it did the same thing, okay? But when you use this method versus the crop tool, okay, you can then copy and paste this one into the next image. And because I've chosen level, it's going to try to level each image. And if they're not tilted at the same degree, it's going to adjust each one differently, right? So that's one benefit. So if I copy and paste the settings, right, copy, I would just copy not the crop settings, but I would copy, where are we? Transform. Okay, so I'd copy the transform settings from one to the other, and it would correct that tilt in the whole set. Right. So there's a little trick for you. If you do it with the crop tool, it only does the same crop, whatever number is in here. That's what it would copy and paste to the next one, and it may not be at the same angle. Okay. All right, so we've got our tilt corrected. Now I'm going to go in and do the sky because I want to bring this detail down in the sky before I start doing more global adjustments. So I'm going to use the masking tool and select sky. These new masking tools in Lightroom are actually really, really good. Okay, so I'm going to start by bringing the exposure down. But what happens is it's affecting this part of the sky more than it's affecting this part. Okay. If I turn the clipping warnings on, you can see that it has fixed the problem, but now the sky looks kind of dull. Okay, so when you're correcting things like this, you need to make a few different sliders. One isn't going to do it. Okay, because if I pull this down too far, okay, you see what it's making everything sort of look flat. So I'm going to pull exposure down, but I'm actually going to increase the whites. Okay, that sounds strange. And then I'm going to bring the highlights down to try and solve that problem in this upper corner. Like so. And I may even bring up either dehaze. See what that does. So something nice there. Or a little bit of clarity. So see what that's doing is it's maintaining the contrast in the sky. I still have a little bit clipping, but it's the sun, right? And when the sun is there, and we've got a little bit of sun flare here. So what I might do is leave that part clipping. Okay, when you have a light source like the sun in your picture, don't worry so much if it's clipping. I'm actually going to blue this up a little bit because it looks kind of yellow. So I want it to be cooler. Okay, so I added some blue, and that brings out the colors in the sky a bit more. And I'm going to just leave it a little bit softer, like so. Okay. So don't just play with one slider when you're doing your mask. Play with a few different ones, okay? Especially when you're doing this, make sure you maintain the contrast. I do the same when I'm lightening somebody's face or person. You want to make sure that you don't just increase exposure, you also add blacks and whites, okay? So that looks pretty good. Let's do another mask. I'm just going to move this. Notice you can move this little box around. Okay. Just get it out of the road because I wanted to see the sky. So I'm going to do another mask, and I want to get the foreground this time and most of the snow. So I'm going to do a linear gradient, which comes up from the edge or comes in from the edge. Okay. So it gives me this little crosshairs, looks like a little T. So I'm going to just draw not a very wide one either. Okay. So if I draw the lines far apart like this, so if I drag them far apart, I'm just going to show you what happens. Okay, you get a soft graduated dark to light if I darken the exposure. Okay, the closer together these points are, okay, the more harsh or sharp the line is. Okay, so generally you want it softer, but for this one, I actually want it to apply just to the foreground like this. Okay, so I'll keep it fairly sharp, but I'm not going to darken. I just did that to show you. We're going to add texture and clarity. And let's see what happens with dehaze. Look what happens. These are like crazy amounts of texture coming out. Okay. I could even bring the highlights down a little bit if I want to make sure I'm not clipping anything. Look at the difference that's making on the snow. You see that? Before, after. So it's adding a huge lot of texture. Okay. Now I'm going to add another one coming up from the bottom again. So another linear gradient. because I want this foreground a little bit darker. Okay, so now I'm going to lower the exposure, bring the highlights down, and I may even bring the contrast down. And here's a neat thing. Okay, if I add plus texture or clarity with either global or with this other linear gradient, and then do minus texture or clarity here, it's actually going to cancel each other out. Okay, so if I don't want as much texture in the foreground, I can lower the texture and the clarity. Right, and now I'm getting less contrast. So then I can just darken this foreground. Now this is where I do want the wide gradient. Okay, so I want it to just gradually darken the edge. You see what that's doing? I may even crop in a little bit from the bottom. So let's go about there. Okay. Now I find it's getting a little bit gray. So I'm going to add a little bit of blue. Okay. When the snow is bluer, right, you get more blue in the shadows. See how it feels colder than if it's warmer. Okay. So that's why they call, yellows and reds and oranges warm colors, because they feel warmer, right? That feels warmer than that. So I'm just going to go ever so slightly blue on it. Okay. Now let's go back to the crop tool. I'm using the keyboard shortcut R. Rob, can you please provide a link to our Lightroom keyboard shortcuts cheat sheet if anybody wants to download that? Okay, so now I'm going to go off the normal aspect ratio. So I'm going to make sure it's unlocked. Okay. And I'm just going to come up from the bottom. So I'll make this a bit more panoramic. Okay. And I'm just going to get rid of this front sort of spot there, because there's some really cool things happening with this fence over here and lots of texture. And there's a lot of foreground. Maybe we don't need so much foreground. Okay. So something like that, a little more panoramic. Let's see what we think. Okay. I'm just going to do. Okay. See the difference? Let's do before. Okay. And after. So we brought out some color in the sky, brought out some texture in the snow. Okay. Oops. So what I'm using there to show you, this is called the lights out mode. I'm just pressing L on the keyboard. So it fades out the rest of Lightroom, goes to black, and then back again. So you just cycle through by pressing L. And that's on that keyboard shortcuts sheet. So what do you think so far, Bjorn? Lynn's in Lloydminster. What are you doing in Lloyd? Oh, Sheila's in Nova Scotia. Awesome. We got coast to coast covered. Well, I know that Anne is in Vancouver, so at least I think she is. We got coast to coast Canada covered. So what do you think, Bjorn? So now that we've got that, I can do things like add a slight edge vignette, right? Just like this. Okay, that's one of my Lightroom presets. Rob, if you could share a link to that. Claudia. Welcome, Claudia. Is that a Nicaraguan flag? Looks like a Nicaraguan flag. Bienvenidos. Okay, so let's continue with this one and do a little bit more. I did an entire lesson on curves. If you want to share the link to the video on curves, please, Rob. I'm just going to close this histogram for a moment so that we have a little bit more real estate on the screen here, because I want to punch this up a little, right? So curves allows you to just grab this line, right? Down is darker, up is lighter, and up here is highlights. Right? So if I just do this line, okay, that's highlights. Or if I do this way, that's shadows. Okay, so it's the histogram is in the background. Okay, if I want more contrast, I'm going to increase the highlights and decrease the shadows. I'm going to go a little farther here and just darken the whole thing. So see what happens actually when I darken the whole thing, right? There actually appears more texture. So even though the snow is white, right, you need to have part of it in shadow to provide that texture. Right? I talked about that in my talk yesterday at the Visual Storytelling Conference, where shadows are your friend, because you can't have light without dark, and you can't have texture without both. Okay, the same thing. You know, if you think about the old adage, you don't know happiness until you've known sadness, right? You can't have light without dark. Okay, so by adding some darkness here, let's just see what that curves is doing. I'm literally just darkening the image, but that texture in the snow is coming out even more. Okay. So there's still white. The snow is still white in parts, right? But you need to have some shadows. The same goes for if you have a subject that's all black. Say you have a black dog on a black background, you need to have some white highlights to make the dog stand out. Otherwise, you won't even see him. Claudia says El Salvador. Excellent. Okay, is that where you are, Claudia? You are in El Salvador? I've only been to El Salvador through the airport going to Nicaragua. So we could go into Luminar, and I normally would do that and do my normal mystical filters. So I'm going to leave this one here because I've got some fun images that I want to play with today. Oh, actually, we will go to Neo because remember how I said this sun? Let's go and add a sun rays. Okay. So a lot of the things in Neo are ready to go. There's still a few things that are in development. They haven't added some of the tools yet, but the ones like Relight, AI, and all the portrait tools, and a lot of the other tools that were in Luminar AI are already in Neo. So I'm going to hop straight down to sun rays here. And I'm going to drag the amount up. So this allows you to place the sun. Okay. So I drag the amount up, and then it gives me a choice of where to place it. Okay. Now we know that the real sun is up here. Okay. So I want to place it in the same place. I'm just going to bring this down so I can actually see. There we go. Okay. So now we can see the original image. The sun is actually just out of the frame. So that's where I'm going to put it, right there. Okay. Now that I've got it where I want it, I can choose to warm it up, but I don't want to in this case because it will not match the scene. I can increase or decrease the amount of rays. So I think fewer is probably better here. And then my favorite, which is randomized. So literally you're just sort of rotating it around. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to find one where it sort of matches where it hits these little flares, right? So I'm just going to keep going until I get something I like. You can also just click along it like this. Okay? Maybe I need more rays. Maybe I need less rays. So you sort of just have to get lucky. Maybe I want a little bit longer. Okay. Not getting one that I like here. All right, we're just going to pick one that's close. Tell me when to stop. Okay, how about that? That's not bad. I'm being choosy today. Oh, I had one that was good. Okay, there we go. So see what it's doing is it's enhancing what's already there. Okay, then we can use this overall look slider. So if we go to the left, it becomes sort of dark and moody with the sun being the focus of the image. If we go the other way, it lightens everything up. Okay, so you can affect your image this way as well. Okay. So I can increase the flare. Okay. Something like that. So it really goes with what's already there in the image. So instead of trying to get rid of it, we actually went with it. Okay. And then, of course, my final favorite, Mystical. I like Mystical. Okay. So Mystical does a great thing, but it's getting rid of all that texture that I added previously. So what I'm going to do is just mask it out of the foreground a bit. So I'm using the mask, painting with the eraser, big brush. I'm using the square bracket keys. We have a Luminar AI keyboard cheat sheet as well. The Neo one isn't completed yet because a lot of the features aren't in the program yet. But if you want, you can download the Luminar AI one, and most of the keyboard shortcuts are similar. Okay, so if you want to share a link to that, please, Rob. Okay, so now I'm just adding Mystical into the sky. See that? So I've masked it off. So before and after. So hit apply, and that will take it back into Lightroom. Ah, you're in Maryland, Claudia. Okay, snowing as well. So the scene may look familiar to you. So now is your inspiration to go get a snowy photo when it stops snowing. If you get some nice sun and the snow is all crisp and fresh, go ahead and go and take some photos like this. And now you know how to process them. There's the Luminar keyboard shortcuts for you in the chat. If you're watching this video replay, it will be in the description below the video as well. So if you are enjoying this so far, thanks for giving this video a thumbs up. And remember to subscribe to the channel. And also, we would love it if you could help us grow the YouTube channel. We would love to hit 20,000 subscribers this year. So if you could share this video on your Facebook wall or with some friends or whatever social media you use, share this video or one of our others on our channel to help us promote the channel. Let's try and hit 20,000. So if everybody brings one friend, we should be able to hit that this year. So let's do another image. Let's go back to the original snow image. I'm just going to do a virtual copy, and then I'm going to reset it. So I want to show you where we came from. Okay, so original image, out of camera, Lightroom edit, and final edit. Okay, so see where you can take your images. So I want to play with some abstracts today. Now this one, Rita sent in a while ago when we were looking for water images, and I thought it might be fun to just kind of funk it up a little, or what I would call funk it up a little. So I'm going to play with the camera profile first. So there's not a lot of color here. She's already chosen landscape, which gives it sort of a green color. So I think I'm going to work with that and punch it up a little bit more. Then I'm going to do my usual, let me just get a bigger screen here. There we go. Then I'm going to do my usual shift double click. So if you haven't seen me do this before, I hold the shift key down, double click on the word whites. And what it does is it slides the white slider up or down, depending on your image, to hit the edge of the graph. Okay, so it means that there was nothing white before, and it's moved the whites to plus 42. Okay, I'm just going to hit undo. Watch the histogram and watch the white slider. Okay, shift, double click, and then I'm going to do the same on blacks. Okay, so what that does is it sets what's called the white point and the black point. Okay, so it increases the contrast. Now I'm going to hold Alt Option down and drag the black slider even further because I want to have some good blacks. And I'm actually going to crop this top of the image out. So let's do the crop first. I'm going to go off this aspect ratio and just go into something like this. So basically, I want to crop out the bits that are really sharp. So something like that. Okay. Now I'm going to go back with my black and white slider, because now you can see once I've cropped the top area out, I don't have any black. So I'm going to keep going so that I have some nice rich blacks. Okay. Let's check the whites. We can have a little bit. You don't want the whites to clip. Okay. So just sort of a little peaking highlight right there. So see the difference that increasing the blacks and the whites make? Okay. It increases the color saturation. So I almost never drag saturation up. Almost never. Okay. So now what I want to do is play with the color a little bit. Okay. So I could actually do that here. I could make it bluer or more warm. We could make it more pink or green if we want to have some green in the water. Okay. I think what I want to do, because the original color was pretty good actually, is go down into HSL and enhance the colors separately. Okay. So I want to affect greens in the water. So let's see if I can bring the greens out. See how it's affecting it a little bit, but not much. So I'm going to bring the green luminance or brightness up. Let's see about yellows. Okay, yellow brings out those rocks, which is kind of cool. Or we can minimize them, whatever we choose. So I'm just playing around. Okay, there's a couple of orange rocks. Doesn't do anything that I want. Okay, so it's doing a little bit here on the greens and the yellows, but not as much as I had hoped. Let's try saturation on the greens. Okay, that helps the water a little bit. So this is the toggle on and off for this tool. So it's subtle, but it's toning down these bright rocks and brightening that up a little bit. Just for fun, I'm going to choose a mask and tell it to select subject, because I want to see what Lightroom thinks is the subject here. Because normally what it looks for is things that are sharp. Okay? So you could see didn't do a good job. So when you're dealing with things that are a little bit abstract or there's lots of movement like this, Lightroom's going to have a hard time choosing the subject. Okay? So I'm not going to actually do that. Just wanted to see what Lightroom would think is the subject. So it went for the bits that it thought were the sharpest. Okay. So let's see, what else can we do? So there's not a lot of stuff you can do in Lightroom to sort of add effects and like I said, make it a little bit funky. So we could do things like minus texture and minus clarity, but then it just starts to become sort of a blurry mess. So once again, I'm going to go to Neo. Okay, now, if you want a truly non-destructive workflow, what you want to do is edit in, open as a smart object in Photoshop, and then go over to Luminar. The reason I'm not doing that with Neo right now is because there is a bug in the program. You can do that and apply Neo as a smart filter, but then when you close it and come back to Photoshop, it actually shows Luminar AI. And then if you try and open it again, it opens Luminar AI. So there is a bug, and it's been reported, and they know about it, and I'm sure they'll have a fix for it soon. Right? Of course, if you are familiar with Skylum, they're actually based in the Ukraine, and most of the team is there. So they're having trouble working right now because most of them have left Kiev, the city, and are trying to work remotely from elsewhere because of the situation in the Ukraine. So, okay, so now I can go and try a preset. Okay, if I want to just play around with presets. I don't think this is, I want something that's abstracty, right? And I don't know if I'm getting anything. These are all going to sharpen things. So I think I'm going to have to just play around. Ooh, artistic. Let's try artistic. Right? That's better. That's not bad. Now, the one thing about the presets in Luminar Neo, that definitely punches up the color. I think that's actually not bad too. So let's go with one of these. Okay, that looks pretty good. The one thing about these presets now is it applies it, but you don't see the filters and the tools that are inside of it. So there's no way to unpack it and edit each of the steps individually. All you can do is dial it up or down. Okay, so I'm actually just going to apply it a little bit lower. And you can't mask it either. So that's kind of a pet peeve or negative aspect of these presets. But if I want it as a starting point, always apply a preset first in Neo, right? Unless they change this later. Always apply your preset first. So get your base editing and then go back to the tools and continue, okay? So which of the tools can we use to add some blur or some color, right? Most of these are going to be obviously in the creative section, okay? We could try Mystical, my favorite. So let's see what that does. That punches the shadows up as well. Okay, so if I do that, we get a little more color. We can also mask it. Okay, so if I want these little peaks of white to be sharper, okay, I could just use a mask, erase, and maybe even at 50%, get my brush about the size of the white and just sort of brush over each of them so I have a little more sharpness in these areas maintained. Okay? So I'm just kind of picking each of the little peaks. I just turned the mask on so I could see it all the time by pressing the / key. Okay, that should be good. So now let's see what it's doing. So see how it's blurring everything more and the water less. Maybe even I want to keep these ones in the middle extra sharp. Okay. So I like what that's doing. And now that I've masked it, I might even take it farther. Okay. So that's doing a nice thing. Let's do a vignette. Okay, I didn't add a vignette in Lightroom, but we can do that here. And the benefit of the one in Luminar is that you can place it. Okay, so my trick is dial the darkness way down, get the size and the shape how you want it. Okay, and then choose the subject. So I want to focus on these sort of splashes over here. But what's going to happen is this area is going to go really dark. Okay, so if I do that and then put the feather back up, okay, this gets really dark over here. Okay, so in second thought, I think I need to actually put it over here. So I want to darken these parts. Okay, so you can move it even off the screen. And I want to keep this dark area lighter. So let's feather it. And then keep your vignette soft. Okay, so don't do things like this and don't do things like this. Right? Make sure that the edge is soft, so feather is high, and the amount is more subtle so that you don't see the vignette. Okay. See what it's doing? It's just taking our eye away from this edge. Okay? Subtle, but it's there. Now let's play with another one that's kind of cool in terms of color, and that's mood. So mood allows you to choose what's called a LUT or a lookup table. I always recommend changing the amount to 50. Okay, now you notice it didn't do anything. You have to pick one first. Okay, there isn't a preview currently in Neo. I'm hoping that that gets reinstated as well. So you have to click on each one to see what it does. But if you've used them a bit, you start to know which ones have certain color tones and which ones you like. Okay? I know, for example, Palm Springs is more pink. Okay, I knew that Los Angeles is more faded out. If we go down into the cross processing, we might find something interesting here. Okay? Now, the reason I put it at 50 amount is because I wanted to see the effect stronger so that I can choose it, and then I can always decide to dial it back, right? But you need to be able to see what it's doing, right? That kind of emphasizes the water nicely. So far, I'm not seeing one that I like. That's too brown, too pink. Okay, that's kind of doing some nice things. Let's try this one. That's doing some nice things. And of course, we can affect the contrast and the saturation. So let's just push this one a little bit. So before and after. So let's see what we've done in Luminar so far. So we punched up the color, added some blur. Okay. You can also try dramatic. I usually drag this one up and then bring the local contrast down. This one's not doing it for me. I think I'm going to skip that one. Another one that you could try, even though it's in the portrait section, is high key. Okay, so high key is kind of the opposite or similar to dramatic, but it focuses on making things lighter and airier. Okay, so if I want to lighten things, I can play around with this. The standard high key slider adds more of this high key effect everywhere, right, versus dynamic that's a little bit more responsive with the image, a little bit more subtle. Okay. Glow adds a glow to the whites. Okay, so if we want to really blur the whites out, kind of opposite of what we just did, keeping them sharp. Okay, so that kind of is an interesting effect, different than what we had before. Okay, so there is no right or wrong when you're playing with things like this in terms of abstract. And of course, I could go in and, you know, paint this off the whites again. If I want to just keep these ones sharp. If I want to keep these as my focus, right? Keep your eye there. How are we looking? That looks kind of cool. Now that I'm looking at it, this white thing up at the top here is bothering me. Right? Now, there is no dodge and burn tool currently in Neo. I believe they are putting it back, but there's actually a better way to do it anyways. Just open up the develop tool again. You can dial down highlights and or exposure. Right? You see what happens. So watch, it applies to the entire image, but I'm just going to use the mask and paint it in with a lower opacity. I'm just going to paint it in this top area. So I'm basically doing, this would be burning. So burning is darkening. These are old darkroom terms. Okay? See how that's affecting that area? So anything that I want darker, I could do this over here as well. I do with this. Okay? So I want to get these edge bits darker. I'm basically painting in a custom vignette even more than just doing a vignette. Okay? And of course, it's always editable. Okay? So I can take the highlights down even more, shadows down even more, and so on. But you have the benefit of also lowering saturation, any of these things, as opposed to what you can do with dodge and burn is just tone control. Okay? Now, if there's another area that I want to lighten, I just close the tool, open it again, and it's now zeroed out because all your edits appear over here under the edit panel. Okay, so the develop, that all the things that I did previously. So if I open develop again, but this time, let's say I want plus exposure and plus shadows, I want to lighten things up. Okay. Now I can paint that in where I want to paint that in. So maybe I want to lighten this area a little bit to get a bit more color. Okay. So all you have to do is just paint with develop twice. Okay. But see how this gives me more options than the dodge and burn tool, because now I can increase the saturation just of that area, okay, or decrease it. Let's get some color in here too. Okay. Any questions about that? I'm going to hit apply and come back to Lightroom. Where's the questions? Okay. Nigel says, if I add a preset first, would you go to develop tool or do you still see develop raw? In this case, I did not see develop raw because I opened it from Lightroom. Okay. So you would only see develop raw if you open it in the standalone or you open it as the source original file. And unfortunately with presets, no, they don't. If you apply a preset, develop raw is basically not there anymore. Okay. Whatever you do with the preset overwrites everything else. So if you do some develop raw or some other things first and then apply a preset, it overwrites everything. So currently that's the disadvantage of the presets the way they're set up now. Canberra, welcome. When there are hundreds or thousands of presets, how do you decide which one to pick? Well, Luminar actually gives you suggestions, right? So you saw the ones at the top. Those are suggested ones based on your subject matter, okay? So try those first. You'll find you can also favorite ones that you like and that match your style. So you kind of just have to play around, unfortunately. But you can also purchase sets of presets. We have a set for portraits in the Skyline Marketplace. If you do portraits, if you want to share a link to Fabulous Faces for us, Rob, please. Oh, hey, Rita. Yeah, so I kind of like the abstract look of this. So go ahead and play around with that and see what you can come up with if you want to match it. You could also even create something completely different for color, right? You could go more blue, you could add some pink. So, you are the artist, you get to decide. But I thought it was a fun image to play and make something abstract. Does it mean if you use a preset in Neo, you're no longer editing a raw file? Well, let me open Neo directly. I'm going to drink of water here. Okay, I've been working on the Luminar Neo course, so these are images that you might recognize. Okay, so these are raw files, for example. Let me pick one that I haven't worked on yet. Let's see. Okay, this one here. Okay, so that's a DNG. I have had some issues with DNGs as well. Let's just see what happens. Okay, so go in here. Okay, so you'll see it says develop raw. And let's see what happens if we choose a preset. And this also answers the question about how do you choose. Okay, so see these ones up here where it says for this photo. This is suggesting objects, blockbuster, or filmatic. Okay, so I'm going to choose the objects collection. Right, and now it recognizes that I'm working with a macro or a still life. Okay, so I'm just going to try some of these. See what happens. Right, so this is also another drawback of the presets because I like what it's doing to the watch, but I don't like what it's doing to the background. So I'd love to be able to mask that, and currently you can't. Right? I'm just going to pick something here that does nothing is grabbing me. Anything grabbing you guys? Let's try Blockbuster. This ought to be interesting. Okay, let's go with this one. So now once we have applied a preset, okay, teal and orange is now applied, and you see it in the edits, which is the history now, okay? And let me just remove that off the screen. Now if I go to tools, okay, so make me a liar. Develop raw still is there, but you see the drawback? You don't have all the tools. You only have curves and color. Okay, so it's limited you now. You don't have any of the optics or anything else. Okay, so if I reset this image, and again, I don't know if that is a bug or if that's something that they plan on correcting because the presets are still sort of rudimentary. And I know that they're working on converting Luminar AI templates and ones that you've purchased, like ours, for example, into Luminar Neo presets. Okay, so you'll notice that when we go back and reset the image, you have a lot more options. Okay, so if you apply a preset, then the developer is still there, but all you have is curves and color. That's it. Okay, so great exercise. Germany, welcome. I don't know how to say welcome in Germany. Unfortunately, even though my dad's family was German, I only need to know how to say bad things, unfortunately. Sheila, I like the way you're doing a dodge and burn via develop. I hope I can remember this trick or way around no dodge and burn. It's in the course, Sheila. So I did talk about that in the course and how you can use all the tools, kind of like another layer, right? And like I said, I like actually using develop as opposed to dodge and burn because you have more options. You can affect color and sharpness and other things as well. Welcome in. Yes, of course. Rob is using Google Translate, perhaps. Hey, we should see how many languages we can get today. What's Nigel's question? Did I miss Nigel's question? Let's see. I answered it? Okay. All right. How many languages do we speak in this group? Who's watching today? Type what languages you speak in the chat. Obviously, I speak English, my first language, and I speak a little French and a fair bit of Spanish, and I can understand Portuguese and Italian a little bit. All right, so let's see if I can squeeze in one more image before I have to go to the visual conference. I'm actually going to save this one as Stephanie's, partly because I don't think she's here today. And I want to play around with this one in some effects in Photoshop, but I want her to see this one. Okay. So, Anne speaks Lithuanian. Yes, I remember that. I remember that about you. Awesome. Rob speaks slang. I think he also speaks PHP and CSS, don't you, Rob? Which is like programming languages. Okay. Let's see if we can do one more with Holly's. Okay, so we've got this abstract close-up of this flower. So let's do something similar. Okay, I'm going to do a color profile. Ooh, landscape really punches up those greens, which is not necessarily a good thing. So I'm doing the basic edits in Lightroom, Holly. You can do the same thing in Luminar, and then we're going to hop over there anyways, okay? So I'm going to do the shift double click. Okay, so this one went fairly high on the whites. I'm going to dial it back just a little bit and instead bring up the exposure. Okay, so remember exposure is midtones. I want the flower to come up in the midtones a little bit. And I might actually leave the blacks not quite so black, because I have an idea with this one that I might do a matte look. Maybe we'll go there. Okay. So we could add some texture and clarity, but remember, actually, I'll show you what happens here. Okay, so let's say we go minus texture and clarity. So we go fully blurry. Okay, so minus 100, minus 100. Then I'm going to go select subject. Let's see what Lightroom picks. Okay, it got most of the flower, but not all of it, and it didn't get these other bits. So I'm just going to do paint instead. And what I'm going to do is paint in 100 texture and 100 clarity. So wherever I paint, it's going to come back to 0. Okay, so minus 100 plus 100 equals 0. So I'm getting the flower texture back where it was at the beginning. Okay. So I just wanted to show you that. And then if I wanted to increase the texture of the flower, okay, all I have to do is duplicate this mask. Okay, and it automatically duplicated where I painted and the same settings. Now I have extra texture and clarity. So now I have 100% or plus 100 on these areas and minus 100 on the background. Okay, so if I turn it off, see how it's blurring this one over here. So this one doesn't have such a huge effect because there's not a lot to blur in the background, but I just wanted to show you what happens when you paint with minus and plus. So bringing out that texture in the flower is actually kind of cool, right? But I think we're actually going to blur it anyways, right? Let's play with the color. I'm actually going to undo some of that. So I'm going to go over to history over here. This is something I don't talk a lot about in the Lightroom panel. Let me just close that up for a minute. So in the history section over here, it's everything I've done from the beginning. Okay, so you can see where I added the brush and I did all of those things. I painted with clarity and texture. You can see where I applied the clarity and texture minus 100. So I'm actually going to go back to one step just before that and start from there. So I could have undone those things or, clicked on the sliders or to reset them and undone the mask or deleted the masks or just go back in the history. Okay. I want to play with the color now because I want to have more pink. So let's see what happens if we go with this slider. So we could add a little bit of pink that way. Or we could go blue. Actually, blue is kind of cool. It adds some blue in the background over here. So that's kind of neat. Let's go to HSL and let's even play with the hue. So we have this targeted adjustment tool here. Unfortunately, there isn't a targeted adjustment tool in Luminar, right? So you just have to kind of play with the sliders. I'm going to click on this flower color, and when I click and drag up and down, it's going to affect and shift the colors of whatever I'm hovering over. So you see I actually got a yellow, and it's shifting the green stem from green to yellow. Okay, so that's not exactly what I wanted. I'm just going to undo that. Let's try over here because I want to get the pink. Still getting orange. Okay, so up, I'm shifting it more towards yellow. Down, I'm getting more red. Okay, so I'm shifting the hue. I don't like this big yellow stem in the middle, so I still have my targeted tool active. I'm going to go to saturation and bring the saturation down a little bit. Okay. Let's try luminance as well so we can really affect this stem. I want to get rid of the sort of, well, that's interesting. Sometimes you get a happy accident. We can actually sort of run with that if I want to go with it darker and then go abstract. Okay. Well, let's go, or we could go lighter. Go lighter and then play more with the saturation. Okay. So I'm trying to just minimize this whole stem thing in the middle here. Okay, so now we've gone completely shifting the colors. You can use that to shift the color of the shirt somebody's wearing or other things as well, okay? But the disadvantage of using these tools here is that it does apply to the entire image, okay? And you can't apply it as a mask, or you can't apply it as a painted in. So that's one disadvantage of the HSL tool in Lightroom, actually, is you don't have the ability to do that. Okay, so let's actually start from here, and I just turned that tool off really simply by toggling it off. And then I'm going to hop over to Neo again, because the cool thing in Luminar, whichever version you're using, is that the color tools are maskable. Okay, so you can paint them in and out where you want. And I've only got about 3 minutes left. The neon puke. Yes, it is neon puke green. How the heck do I remember all of this stuff? 30 years. 30 years of doing it. So you've heard the thing about you need to put in your 100 hours or 1,000 hours or whatever it is. So you just have to keep doing it. That's all. Unfortunately, there's no shortcut. All right, so now we're in Luminar, and we're going to go to the color tool, okay, which has the same HSL sliders. I know that I want to affect this green thing, okay? So I'm going to do saturation of yellows, saturation of greens, okay? And then from here, I could see about increasing the color of the flower, okay? So increasing the oranges and the reds, magenta. And let's see about shifting the color of the green. What happens if we make it blue? Yeah, there's neon puke. Okay, so the advantage here is that I could do whatever I want, but if I only want it to apply to this middle flower, I could mask these out. Okay, but let's try and go a little more abstract with this one using some of these blur techniques. And I think I'll play around. If Stephanie is on the call on the thing next week, I will play around with her flowers and go real abstract with Photoshop. So I want to try some of these cross-processed ones here because we might find something cool. Because I want to I'm looking for fun and funky. Oh, pastel's kind of cool. Adds contrast. And you can see why I turned the amount up on this one so that I can see the effect. That's kind of soft. So we could go two directions with it. We could go soft or we could go crazy over the top, right? These ones aren't working. Let's try some of these. Contrast. Oh, that's kind of cool. And see what that's done to the background? That's neat. Okay, so I'm liking this one so far. Even that one. Let's go with this. Let's go with this cool one because that was kind of cool. Okay, that's a faded out look that I was thinking about doing, but we can still do that. Okay, so let's take this all the way up and see what it does. Okay, so it's adding some neat colors, but maybe I don't want it. Oh, we can go crazy with the colors. Maybe I don't want it to be quite as bright in the middle here, so I'll just do a quick mask, 50%, large brush. Now we're getting somewhere. That's kind of neat. Right? Again, mystical. Okay, now we're complete abstract. We don't even know if it's a flower if you go that way. Okay, let's do some mystical. We could even add grain on this one. We could play with the glow, which is going to glow the highlights. Okay, so glow itself glows the highlights, which adds more contrast. And then the mood, the matte one is the one I was thinking about applying. So it makes the blacks sort of faded out. See that? And I've covered all of these tools in the Luminar Neo course one by one. And I'm actually just getting to recording the layer lesson. So coming soon, actually after this next thing with the visual storytelling conference, I'll be back to making some Luminar Neo videos. So how did we do with languages? We've got Deutsch, so German, we got English, Lithuanian. Rob speaks all of these computer languages. Trish, a little French, Norwegian. I'm going to guess that Bjorn speaks Swedish. Awesome. Okay. So yeah, I used to do all of this kind of stuff on physical negatives with a tiny little brush, doing negative retouching to remove blemishes on people. So anything that was dark on the negative, because it was an inverse, you had to paint it in with a paintbrush and then retouch it again on the print. So if I made 20 prints of one thing and my negative retouching wasn't perfect, I had to touch up every single print. So imagine doing senior or grad photos. Right? So I think we're going to stop here, because I like this look, and I'm going to leave this with you, Holly, to play with and see what you can come up with. But I'm liking this blue and this pink. We could even use the relight tool to try and play around with the light as well. You could add a sun rays, all kinds of things. Okay, so get creative with this and see what you can come up with. Okay. And I will, just a quick reminder here, that you can get the Luminar Neo course. Actually, put a link in there, Rob. We should put that on the screen. We bought the domain name completeneocourse.com. So it makes it easier for you to find it. And I have to go to the other conference. Kelly, good to see you. You just bought the Photoshop course, right, Kelly? So I'm glad you're doing that. And there's a link to the Complete Neo course. And I hope if you are enjoying these videos that you subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and share it. So we'll be back next week at the same time, and see you there in about 30 seconds. Take care, everyone.